Welcome back to the build, everybody. Sick and all, we have to make a video. We're gonna start working on the base again. The first thing I'm gonna do is start painting this up black. Again, I'm just using Tamiya's X-1 black because it's a nice deep black. I didn't want to use the other black I had, the charcoal black, because that's more of a grayish black. And now that the bottom's all painted up, it's time to work on the electronics. I have to work on the power port here, and I never remember which legs are what. So all I do is take my multimeter while I have power on the power supply, and I take the two prongs and I'm gonna put them onto two of the leads to see which one is our positive and which ones are negative. Here you can see I have it backwards. The -12 is telling me that the crook neck should be the positive and the longer lead should be the negative. So I'm just gonna switch them around. This way I make sure that I'm right because I don't want to have my polarity backwards. And boom, there we go. We got 12.45, and now we know which leads we're going to put our wiring on. The next thing I'm going to do is wire up the power supply. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some flux onto the posts, the positive and negative. This helps to solder it here and suck right onto those posts. With the flux on, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-tin both of the posts, and then I'm also going to pre-tin the wire. My hands are a little shaky here because I was very sick while I was doing this. Had the flu pretty bad. But again, just taking some solder, heating up the post quickly and letting the solder suck on there. This way we have a pre-tin and it makes those wires go on there a lot easier. Now I'm going to pre-tin up the wires. I have two wires spun up here because I'm going to need two negative leads off of the power supply. One is going to go for the LEDs and one is going to go for the lightsaber. And then I'm going to have only one positive lead coming off of our power supply, going to our on-off switch because I don't just use a plug to plug it in. I always use an on-off switch together with the power supply. And here I'm just pre-tinning it up so it makes it easier when I put it onto the power supply unit. I have both parts ready in my helping hands. I got my shrink tube on there, and all I'm doing is heating up both parts because they're pre-tinned. Just got to heat them up and let those pieces melt into each other, and then take off the soldering iron, and it'll dry up, or actually cool down, I should say, and they'll set up really nicely. Once everything is cooled down, I put my shrink tubing over the bare post and the wire, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my torch. I'm going to heat up that shrink tubing, let it shrink the job it's supposed to do, and those wires will now be protected. Now I'm prepping the positive lead. I just put some flux on there, getting the soldering iron hot, and then I'm just going to put some solder on there, pre-tin it. This way it's ready to go for when we put this on the positive portion of the power outlet. Again, doing the same thing we did with the negative side, just heating up the pre-tins, letting them melt together, letting them cool down, and they'll solidify, and we'll have a nice bead of solder there holding everything together. Now the power jack is all wired up. The next thing I have to do is bring this into the base, and that's where we cut out the circle over here. I'm just going to wire all the wires right through that hole, and we're going to pop in the power outlet over here. And bingo, it fits in there really, really nicely. The next thing I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to bring the wires back out through the other hole because we have to solder up the on-off switch, and I'm not going to be able to do that, of course, from the inside. So I'll just pop those out. We'll start working on the power switch. And of course, the first thing I do before pre-tinning is I'm adding some flux onto both leads of the on-off switch. Remember, both leads of the on-off switch are going to be positive. So we're going to have a positive lead coming from our power supply to the on-off switch, and then I'm going to have two positive leads coming off of one of the other posts. One is for our lightsaber, and one is for our LED lights. Now it's time to grab the solder and soldering iron and pre-tin up both of the legs of the on-off switch. This way we could get those wires on there a lot easier. Something I forget to do a lot, and which I try not to, is putting the shrink tubing on first, because a lot of times I solder things up and I forgot the shrink tubing. I got to cut it and do it again. Again, just putting some flux on there. This way it makes it easier to solder both of these parts together. Next up, I have my next set of twisted wires for the positive side. Again, just pre-tinning these up. I forgot to record the other part where I put the shrink tube on. You could see it down there at the bottom, but getting these done, this way we, like I said before, have an easier time of soldering the two pieces together. I have my two positive leads soldered right to the on-off switch. The next thing, as usual, we're going to put our shrink tube on there. This way we make sure we protect the solder job that we did, and also this way there's no accidental touching of any of the metal parts, and we don't want any short circuits or anything like that messing up any of our hard work. Now that the on-off switch is all wired up, the last thing to do is pop the wires through that hole, and then we're going to take that on-off switch that has the two little plastic clips on the side, push it in there pretty tight, and seat it in, and we should be good to go. It's a little tight getting in there, so I got to give it an extra little squeeze, get it all straightened out, and it doesn't want to go in for me right away, but I do get it in there, and I think I get it now. There we go. Popping it all in side by side with our power supply, and we're good to go. And finally, it was time to attach the top to the bottom. I used some 5-minute epoxy, holding it down for a little bit, let it bond, and then I'm going to put something heavy on it for about 24 hours. The next fun part was getting all the positives and negatives for the magnet wire because I forgot to label everything. After 24 hours, everything was really nice and set up. The only thing I have to do now is there are some light leaks around the bottom rim here, and that we're going to take care of with Tulip Slick. The next thing I'm going to wire up is our positive and negative to the 3 LED strips. I use some paper towel on the wires because I don't want those metal crimps breaking the wire and then we have to rewire everything up. Of course, I have flux on top of the wires. I'm heating them up freehand to get them nice and warm, and then I'm going across with my solder, putting a nice bead on, and then we're going to do our shrink tubing over that. I have my shrink tube on there. I'm just pulling it across. We're going to put it over the wires, which were still a little hot when I was grabbing that, but this is just to protect them. Again, we don't want any wires touching. We don't want any shorts, grounds, anything like that. We're going to take our blowtorch, heat this up. It's going to shrink it nice and tight, and our work will be protected. And with everything wired up, we flip the switch and we have light, which means I put everything together right, and we just have a little work to do on those light leaks. Like I said before, it's time to work on the light leaks. What we're going to use is Tulip Slick. It's a fabric paint. It's very thick fabric paint. It takes a while to dry. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to squeeze small sections like this around the side, and then once I got a good amount on there, I'm going to take a Q-tip, and I'm going to take the tip of the Q-tip, and I'm going to smush it into the gap over there and clean up any excess, because I really don't want it to get thick anywhere else besides that hole. I let the Tulip Slick dry up for 24 hours. It's in there nice. I did get a few little holes I got to fix up, but we're pretty much good to go on that, and no light from where the holes are for the feet. Now that this is done and all of our wires are pretty much tucked away on the bottom, next thing we're going to have to do is work on the converter to take 12-volt power down to 3-volt power, because the LEDs are 12, the lightsaber is going to be 3. Next up is to work on the power converter. This thing is called a buck converter, I think. All it does is it's going to take in the 12-volt on one side, and it's going to take it to 3-volt on the other side. And it's easy to work with this board. It has in and out on both sides. It's got positive and negative and all that other good stuff to show you which way's the in and which way's the out. And also on the bottom, it has an arrow with the in and out. This way you can't mess up which way you're putting your voltage. I already have the out of the board wired up, which is no big deal. I have my power on. You can see the little blue light over there letting us know power is coming through. So I got 12 volts coming on the inside, and right now you can see that 11.4 is coming on the outside, but we have to get that down to 3. So how we're going to do this is we're going to take our screwdriver, and on the potentiometer, there's a little screw here, a flathead screw, and we're going to screw this thing and make sure that the power is going down. So right now I'm going counterclockwise. Counterclockwise is the way to bring the numbers down. The screwdriver kept falling out and I had to change the bit on it to a smaller bit. But with this thing, just go slowly because it is kind of touchy. And when you get down to 3 or 5 volt, 9 volt, whatever you need, just make sure you let your multimeter sit there for a little while and make sure that it's steady. You don't want it fluctuating more than the power you need. You don't need it jumping from 9 to 10. In my case, I need it at 3 because the noodle we're going to use is 3 volts. So I'm still bringing it down here, bringing it down, and we're going to get it to that 3. And this is a lifesaver. I have it at 299, and I'm going to go very slowly to try to get it to 3. But when I take it off, it does jump up. See, it is very touchy, so I got to play with it a little bit. And now I have it set at 3. And as you can see, I let go of my hands, and it was up at 1. So what I did was I left the power on for about a half an hour, and I made sure that it stayed at 3, and we were good to go with that. And this is the reason we needed the step down for the voltage. This is a warm white 300 millimeter noodle. It's a flexible LED. LED, but it's only 3 volts. If I put 12 volt on here, it's going to blow it out, and we're going to be in a world of hurt and have to figure out a different way. And the easiest thing was to step down the voltage. I have the power converter on this little contraption here. It's a great little item that holds boards, makes it easier to solder and do all that good stuff. So what we're going to do right now is the 2 little pads that are the in for the 12 volts. We're going to tin those up. This way we can put our wires on there. And of course, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put flux on both of those pads. This way, when we do solder them, the solder will just, again, suck right to it and make it easier for us to put all the wiring together. And here I am, I'm just tinning up both pads, heating it up, putting some solder on there, making a nice little pad. And I'm going to do this on both sides, the in and out, and that's going to bring it so we can bring our wires through. Everything will stick together and we'll have a nice connection. Now, the last thing I have to do is take the wires from the base and make sure I put the positive with the positive, the negative with the negative. My wires are pre-tinned up. We're just going to heat up these pads. I'm going to put the wire underneath where I think the hole is. And once that original solder loosens up, I'll be able to push the wire through. It'll come straight up, and then it'll solidify in place, and we'll have a perfect connection. And we'll get power through from the 12 volt side, and it'll flow throughout the 3 volt side, and that's what's going to give us our lightsaber effect. Now I'm going to click the power on because I want to make sure power is flowing through everything. I could see our little light is on up top there, and that's going to be the 3 volt side. So we have our 12 volts coming through the bottom, out through the top where you can see out negative, out positive is going to be our 3 volts, and we're going to hook that up to our magnet wire later on once we start building Darth Talon. And of course, we got to check the outside with the multimeter. It's fluctuating between 2.99 and 3, which is fine by me. I'd rather have it go down a little than up too high. The next thing we're going to work on is the bottom of the board. You may be asking why, and it's because I don't want to stick it right to the bottom of the base. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little piece of foam, I'm going to cut this down, and then I'm going to cut it to size and put it on the bottom of the board itself. As you can see, I have the little piece of foam on the bottom. I just used CA glue on there. I put it on, used a little kicker, and made sure that it's stuck on there. It's good to go. So this is why I wanted it on there. I don't want it on the bottom of the board. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some CA glue, if it decides it's going to come out of the bottle, and we're just going to put it on the bottom here, and then I'm going to hold it in place, make sure it stays, and that'll be set in place and we'll be good to go with the bottom. But we can't enclose it until we start building Darth Talon and bringing the wires through. I want to say a huge thank you to our YouTube members for helping keep the lights on, and thank you to our Patreon members too who've joined up. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to join those things and help with donations basically to the channel to keep everything up and running. We'll see you all on the next one, and hopefully I am no longer sick and I sound a lot better than this. Thanks again, guys. Have a great night. See you all soon.